Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Business of Sports.
The business of sports can be intimidating or hard for a startup to break into.
We really appreciate when our owners are actually there, with us through the journey.
Teams, ours especially, have been very intentional to diversify at all levels of the company.
I think we're in the golden years for the NFL and college football.
Our demographic reach has continued to expand.
This is going to be really unlocking the streaming platform for sports fans.
Sports valuations are rising. We'll see when they peak.
You don't have to be the best in your sport to make a whole ton of money.
Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio. This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr.
And I'm Damian Sassower.
Scarlett Fu is on assignment, and Vanessa Perdomo will join us a bit later. Coming up on the show, we'll dive into the growth of women's sports and how to close the gender wage gap with David Berri.
He is a professor of economics at Southern Utah University and co-author of the book Slaying the Trolls, a book on why a lot of people are underestimating the power and popularity of women's sports.
When you go back and you think about college sports for women really can't begin till Title IX passes in 1972. So men literally get a century head start. Why is college football so popular? It started in the 1870s. It's been around for 150 years.
Plus, we'll talk with Michael Schreiber. He is the founder and CEO at Playfly, a company that places itself right in the center of the relationship between teams and their fans. All that is on the way on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. But first, we look at a growing problem for college athletes. Bloomberg News investigative reporters Peter Robison and Noah Buhayar recently published a new piece featured on Bloomberg Big Take and on Bloomberg Businessweek, a very good read, about the ugly truth college players are facing with payment deals, and they're here now to talk about it. Peter, Noah, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thanks for having us.
This article is fascinating.
Unbelievable.
I'm going to start out with something that I did not know, and I'm a Michigan nut. This happened a year ago, pretty much, that the Spartans, Michigan State University, were threatening to walk because there was a problem over pay. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, it was really a subtext during the season, and players within teams, often don't talk about what's happening behind closed doors. But as we reported in the story, behind closed doors, the collective, the group of boosters who were paying players, was running out of money essentially, and players hadn't been paid, and so before the game, essentially on the plane headed to the game against Iowa, players were told that they would no longer be getting money that they were promised for the season. So as we reported in the story, one player said, "Take me to the airport, I'm going back," and other players started to seriously consider sitting out the game.
That is an unbelievable story. I can't believe it didn't get more press. And talk to us a little bit about these collectives, these boosters. I mean, in this case, the boosters were backed by some pretty deep-pocketed investors. I wonder if you could shed some light on that as well.
Yeah, the people backing Spartan Dogs for Life from the start were Matt Ishbia, who's famously the owner of the Phoenix Suns, and Steve St. Andre, who contributed more of the money and was really more of the driver of the organization. And Steve St. Andre is a technology entrepreneur who'd been involved with a company called Ford Direct, and they're both Michigan State alumni and big boosters of the university.
And so to be clear here, so, the football team or football players, a number of them were promised a certain amount of money they got up to a bad start last season, and within short order, they received emails literally before game time that, they weren't going to be getting paid, right? And so, what do you do? If you're managing a locker room, you're a coach, forget about that. You're the athletic director, and all of a sudden the boosters pull out and you find out minutes before game time. Is that a one-off, or is this something that you're hearing about recurring throughout all of college sports?
Well, Noah can talk more about this, but it's really ultimately it's a structural problem within college football as it is today, because these are essentially $150 million, $200 million businesses with an unpaid labor force, and so structurally, the coaches are paid, the administrators are paid, the assistant coaches are paid, and they're all paid, huge amounts of money. $400,000 for a running backs coach, $2.5 million for a defensive coordinator, and the players, though, are paid in this very ad hoc way through these collectives, which are run by private business people whose motives may differ from the athletic department.
The ground shifted.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to really note here about Michigan State and what was so exceptional is we're hearing about this, constantly in college football now of, players alleging that they weren't given what they were promised by a collective. What was so extreme about the Michigan State case is that it affected so many players at the same time. But as Peter said, I mean, these are large businesses essentially that top tier college football programs. The athletic departments are $150 million, $250 million enterprises with unpaid labor forces. And a lot of money has come into that space, but that money is not coming from the universities. So when you're an athletic director or a coach of a team, you may have to maintain morale, but at the end of the day, you don't control the purse strings.
So help me figure out this one. Within your article, you talk about the saga of Jaden Rashada, a quarterback from the San Francisco Bay Area who, was very highly recruited, actually committed to the University of Miami, the U. And then all of a sudden, the University of Florida, the Gators, their boosters, they wanted this kid, made him a huge offer that he couldn't possibly refuse. So I guess if I'm hearing you guys correctly, he de-pledged, I guess if there is such a thing, from Miami, decided to commit to Florida. And then what happened to this kid?
Well, yes, that's exactly what happened as you describe it. And the amounts that he said he was that were floated to him are enormous. That it was $9.5 million from the University of Miami, $13 million from the University of Florida,
$13 million over 4 years from the University of Florida for a quarterback. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and this is all, but again, this is all structured in a way that's according to the complaint, it was the money was to come from multiple sources, not from the University of Florida itself, from a private business and another collective that was going to be established. And ultimately, according to the complaint, once the pledge was made, the money just wasn't forthcoming, and that is the crux of the issue at many schools. There's a case recently involving a UNLV quarterback who said that he's going to sit out the rest of the season because he wasn't given the $100,000, according to his agent, that he was promised before he agreed to play there.
Yeah, but gentlemen, we're talking about $14 million. I mean, that is an insane amount of money. I mean, are you telling me that these universities and their donors, their boosters, can walk away without any ramifications whatsoever? We're talking about, young, 19-year-old, students. I mean, kids here.
Yeah, it's all starting much earlier, and at the highest levels, these are 17, 18-year-old kids who are hiring agents. They are, needing to, their families certainly are needing to understand the business at a much higher level, much, much younger.
I would add here, one of the core things we found in our reporting is that oftentimes these contracts between the donor collectives and the players are very lopsided. They have termination clauses that allow the collective to basically walk away at any time at their own discretion. Now, what you see in the Rashada case is actual litigation over, what Rashada says is money that was not paid. But I think one of the important things for people to know is that the leverage often in these contracts still lies with the donors and the collectives.
Quick history lesson, and it's in your article. 1948, the NCAA, they imposed a so-called code that banned the use of pay as an inducement. And you could do it if you offered a scholarship, but that was pretty much the only allowable compensation. Now, yes, you had the boosters back in the day. Here you go, kid. Here's a little something for you. But that was pretty much it. Now, you flash forward, and as you put it, the ground shifted in 2021 when the U.S. Supreme Court cast aside the so-called imagined ideals of amateurism, had a unanimous ruling about the NCAA that if you put that same business model, to any other business, it wouldn't even fly. But times have changed, and I wonder now, is like we're in the infancy steps, and I'll start with you, Peter. It's like, what is it going to take to get the understanding here?
Well, I mean, one thing that's happening is that the antitrust suits against the NCAA are increasingly successful over the last decade, and the Supreme Court ruling just put a capper on it. The NCAA has been losing badly in the courts, and the amount of control it was exercising over players was just not going to fly anymore. And the House case in which the NCAA agreed to pay $2.8 billion to settle, which is an enormous amount of money to former players, an average of $90,000 to former Division I football and men's basketball players. Plus, it's also agreed, the NCAA has agreed that schools can share up to $20 million a year in revenue, and so this model will change in coming years. It's just how quickly and how fair it is to the players, because everyone seems to agree that ultimately there will be contracts, there will be collective bargaining. It's just a matter of how soon.
Noah, Peter, you mentioned, the husband of one Terry Saban in your article. Nick Saban, former coach of the University of Alabama, won 6 national titles there. I mean, he has killed it, but he's recently retired. And I can recall back in March, Nick Saban was, he was talking to a bunch of senators on Capitol Hill, right? In front of cameras, talking about, what is wrong with college sports and what the, NIL means for the future of college football. And, isn't the proof in the pudding, right? I mean, he retired. I mean, Terry went on the record and said, the reason my husband Nick retired is because these kids don't play for the love of the sport anymore. They're playing for the money. And I wonder, why the U.S. federal government is so slow in reacting to this. I mean, and letting all of this transpire, because you know how it is. I mean, once these kids and their families are conditioned to deal with college, with college sports and with these universities in this way, it takes an awful long time to change, the playing field. I'm just, what is the holdup? What is the wait? Why aren't we seeing any progress there? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Noah, do you have any thoughts on that?
I was going to turn to you.
Enough said, right?
Oh, yeah. Our own Bloomberg News investigative reporters. Thank you guys for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. Up next, we talk about why a lot of people are underestimating the power of women's sports. For my colleagues Damian Sassower and Vanessa Perdomo, I'm Michael Barr. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
This is the Bloomberg Business of Sports show where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr, along with my colleagues Damian Sassower and Vanessa Perdomo. Scarlet Fu is on assignment. Time now for Slaying the Trolls. That's a recent book diving into why a lot of people are underestimating the power and popularity of women's sports. David Berri is co-author of the book. He's also a sports economist and professor of economics at Southern Utah University. His career recently has focused more and more on gender issues in sports and closing the gender gap. And he's here now to talk to us about that and more. David, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Very glad to be here.
I'm just going to ask the blunt question, the elephant in the room. Why in the hell are we having this conversation in the year 2024? I don't get it.
What part don't you get? The fact that there are men who attack women in sports, both as athletes, in the media, as fans.
All of
that
it.
Part?
Yeah, I mean, this is silly. I don't understand it. You've got people like Caitlin Clark just blowing it up there on the court, and still it's like we still got the trolls out there.
They do not go away. So there are many men, and the trolls are predominantly, almost entirely men. Who are amazingly threatened by women in sports, and any participation by women in sports makes them very insecure. So they question whether or not women are sports fans. They are. They question women whenever they are in the sports media. They question women as athletes. And so it happens continuously. If you are at all on social media, you interact with any women in any of these roles, you'll see people show up who say this. And there also are, men in the media who echo these same sentiments. So it's not just anonymous trolls online who do this.
David, when you're looking at, the title of your book is Slaying the Trolls, Why Trolls Are Very, Very Wrong About Women in Sports. What were you looking to set out when you started writing this book? What did you exactly want to prove wrong? And what do you think the biggest misconceptions are about women in sports? Well,
Neff Walker and I started writing this book back in 2018. And so this came about, I was interacting with women in sports and learning about their experiences. And it was pretty clear that their experiences were very, very different than my experiences were. So I would say things related to my research in sports economics, and I would have some people argue with me, and that would happen occasionally. But usually it wasn't persistent anonymous people, and it didn't happen every single time. And then I would talk to women in sports, especially women in sports journalists, and you would see this. You would see they'd make a comment, and immediately there would be, several trolls showing up, saying things that were derogatory, but also saying things that were factually just not true. And so I spoke to Neff Walker about this because she's done a lot of research in this space as well. And I said, we should write a book. We should go through and say, let's go through the things that the trolls are saying, and let's show them the evidence that that's actually not true. So some misconception. One misconception is that women are not sports fans. There's been anonymous polls that have been done that show that 45% of NFL fans are women. That millions of women will say to pollsters that they're sports fans. Women are not as willing to say that to men in front of them. And there's a reason for that. And we talk about this in the book. When women confess to men that they are sports fans, it is not uncommon, and I've had many women over time tell me this exact same story. It is not uncommon for men to give the women a quiz to see, are you actually a sports fan? And the quiz is something like, can you name the starting guard on the Super Bowl team from 1982? I mean, stuff like that. It's like, this is ridiculous. Why would anyone know that or care? But they are suspicious of the entire notion that women would like sports, because there's a stereotype that sports are just for women, just for men. But if you go back to the very beginning, women have been playing sports and participating in sports. Men have actively banned women from playing sports. That has happened historically. That leads to another myth. There's this idea that women's sports don't earn as much revenue or don't have the same attendance as men's sports because they're just not as good. What we go through in the book is say, no, the story is pretty plain on this one. There is a long history of discrimination against women that have produced the results that we see in terms of revenue and attendance. Women were, as I said, actively banned from playing sports historically. When they started playing sports, they were tremendously underfunded. So when you go back and you think about college sports for women really can't begin till Title IX passes in 1972. So men literally get a century head start. Why is college football so popular? It started in the 1870s. It's been around for 150 years. You're going to build up a really substantial fan base when you have a 150-year history. Women's sports can't go back that far because Title IX only came about in 1972. Then when you turn to the professional ranks, women don't get the same investment that men get on the private sector. That's still true today. They definitely don't get the public sector investment. So there's just this long history of discrimination that makes women's sports have a smaller fan base. and it's nothing to do with the quality of the games.
Dr. Berri, you have served as president of the North American Association for Sports Economics. You currently sit on the editorial board of the Journal for Sports Economics and International Journal of Sport Finance. You are the defining voice on economics and sports, and so I'm hoping you could put some numbers around this for me. I know one such number is that the WNBA currently generates more revenue than the NBA did 50 years ago, yet the gender wage gap has emerged, that much more in the sense that WNBA players today earn significantly less than their male counterparts. I mean, I wonder if you can give us some other statistical data to prove your point here.
Well, I want to emphasize that point. That's a really good point. The NBA back in the early 70s made about $30 million in revenue. If you adjust for inflation, that's about $200 million. The WNBA today makes, according to Bloomberg, last year made $200 million. They made much more this year. But the WNBA player, the top WNBA player today, only makes $250,000. In the early 70s, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was making $400,000 in 1973. So adjusted for inflation, he was being paid $2 million. So there's just this massive gender wage gap between men and women's sports. You can also, this is another little stat that's important. The men's college basketball tournament gets $1 billion a year in broadcasting rights. The NCAA was getting only $1 million a year for the women's basketball tournament. They renegotiated it just a few months ago before the tournament. And they were very proud of themselves. They said, we have gotten the offer for the women's college basketball all the way up to $60 million a year. Again, men are at $1 billion. Then the tournament happens and the women get much higher ratings than the men. And you're like, you just negotiated this contract. And you negotiated a contract that is less than 10% of what the men are getting. And the women are now getting higher ratings. So this is the kind of thing that happens to women a lot, is that when it comes to when it comes to male leaders negotiating for women, they undersell them repeatedly. They don't ask for very much because they don't think it's worth very much because they're not actually fans of it.
So I've seen, what women can do. And I remember at 9 years old watching Billie Jean King against Bobby Riggs. And this is some history, folks, in case you don't know what I'm talking about. Billie Jean King, obviously the great tennis pro, was up against Bobby Riggs, and this was one of those battle of the sexes. And way back when, you had the big women's lib argument, and I'll never will forget, Doctor, my mother watching this saying, please just beat the living snot out of this guy. Because that was a big turning point to me about women coming into sports and women holding their own.
Yeah, we talk about that in the book, and it is a great moment. We also argue in the book it wasn't necessary. And the reason why we argue it's not necessary is because when Canelo Alvarez wins a title as a middleweight boxer, nobody stops for a second and says, sure, you beat up a guy who's 150 pounds. I got this old heavyweight guy. He weighs 260 pounds. He's like Bobby Riggs. The dude's 50 years old, but he outweighs you by 100 pounds. When you beat that guy, I'll take you seriously. We don't ask men to do that. We do not ask middleweight boxers and lightweight boxers. We don't ask them to fight heavyweights because one thing, it's not even, they don't even permit it because it's dangerous. But we understand that when it comes to men, we evaluate men relative to their competition. And if the men are really, really good relative to their competition, then we will say something like, Floyd Mayweather is the greatest boxer in the world. He never could have been the best boxer in the world. He only weighed 145 pounds. How could he be the best? But we say, well, relative to his competition, he was really, really good. And men do this all the time. And then when women play sports, suddenly the trolls show up and say, I wonder if that WNBA team could beat a high school boys team. Okay, they can, but that's irrelevant. That doesn't make any difference. It only matters how well they do against the competition they face. And that's how we should evaluate him. So Billie Jean King is way better than Bobby Riggs because she won a lot more titles than Bobby Riggs ever won. whether she won that match or not, she was still way better. And I think this is a problem, is that we have a different set of criteria for women than we have for men. Because if men follow their same logic, that it's absolute best that matters, then nobody should watch a college football game, ever. You should put a college football game on, and every single guy should look at that and go, why am I watching this? These guys are not even as good as the worst NFL team. This is ridiculous. But they don't do that, right? You watch a college football game, and there are men in the stands who are hanging on every single play as this is the greatest thing that ever happened. And they're not thinking for a moment, I don't think this team could beat an NFL team. So they're shifting the criteria when women are suddenly on the field.
Professor of Economics at Southern Utah University, David Berri, co-author of the book Slay the Trolls. Thank you again for talking with us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, we talk more about the money behind sports with Playfly CEO Michael Schreiber. For my colleagues Damian Sassower and Vanessa Perdomo, I'm Michael Barr. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports, Bloomberg Radio around the world.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio.
Thanks for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports show, where we explore the big money issues in the world of sports. I'm Michael Barr, along with my colleagues Damian Sassower and Vanessa Perdomo. Scarlett Fu is on assignment. Playfly is a sports media, marketing, and tech business that is positioning itself in the center of the relationship between sports and their fans. Here to talk to us about the business, the state of private equity in sports, and more is Playfly founder, CEO Michael Schreiber. Michael, welcome to the Bloomberg Business of Sports.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's talk about Playfly. It's a business that you have created. Tell us about it.
Yeah. We actually just had our 4-year anniversary in the past 7 days. So we hit 4 years old.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's exciting. And we're a newish brand in the world of sports, but we're not pretty big. We've got about 1,000 people. We work for most of the pro teams in the U.S. in some respect, and a big swath of the college athletic departments. And what we do is we're the gateway that sits between the brands and the teams. So our core business is driving sports marketing activity between the teams and the brands, whether we do it through media, whether we do it through in-stadium or through digital and tech platforms. It doesn't matter. We do that connection. We build that relationship. So whether it's sales on the side of the selling for the team, or whether it's consulting for the brand to make sure they get into the right categories to connect to fans, we sit in the middle. And we use tech, we use content, we use data to be able to connect both the brands to the teams a little differently than the rest of the competitors. So the cool thing about Playfly is we get to sit in the center of the ecosystem. You don't see our brand on TV when you're watching the game, but the ads that are there were sold by our team.
That's your content, right? Exactly. You control that content, don't you?
Not only that, we produce a lot of it. So we actually have a whole production company that produces a lot of the commercials you'll see on TV, whether you're watching the Knicks or the Lakers or the Bulls or any baseball team, hockey team, etc. But so the exciting part for us is, even though no one knows our name, when you think about it from a consumer perspective, if you think about it from a B2B perspective, most people know our name now after 4 years.
So then you have to answer this for me. If you're in the Nexus, you're touching a lot of different players in the world of sports, right? You're touching the teams, you're touching networks, you're touching everything. So who are your clients? Like, who do you spend the majority of your time servicing?
Sure. So what we end up doing is most of our service is to the sports ecosystem, because the currency is fandom. And when you think about what drives the business, it's fandom. If fandom is increasing, your currency is increasing, you can sell more at a higher rate. Traditional currency type model that investors speak would under
fast fandom as a service, right?
Yeah, exactly. Fandom as a service is our mantra. So ultimately, what that means is the people who own the fan are the teams.
Right.
So the teams, the leagues, the conferences, the athletic departments, and they're harvesting and harnessing those fans in different ways. So that's what we spend the most of our time with, because if we do a good job there, the brands will come. And then ultimately we match the right brands with the right fans to get them activated and their products bought. But first to your questions, always starts with the teams and their fandom.
And I see you have a huge footprint, right? Major League Baseball, the NBA, WNBA, the NCAA, right?
Yep.
So, I didn't see the NFL there, but I would love to hear your opinion on the role private equity is playing in the NFL. Like, what does that mean to the valuation of these franchises, number one? But more importantly, what is the value proposition from the perspective of a private equity investor? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time. We do work with the NFL directly and a number of teams as well. It's a category that has changed. First, the other big four, right? It went through them, and now we're getting to the final frontier with the NFL. But what it's done is it's actually created a mindset from a team owner and even a league perspective to think about their teams as media companies, as businesses, which is totally different. They're ultimately going after more cash flow, more ways to make money, more ways to slice the onion. And ultimately, they need support and partners and consultants, and that's what we bring. We bring those expertise, whether it's coming in with sales expertise, data, whether it's coming in with technology, or thinking about new commercial strategies to optimize, whether it's putting a new sign in a stadium, whether it's creating a new real estate experience outside of your venue. All of those elements are optimizations of your existing business. There's always growth. And when you look at the pendulum of that, the NFL tends to be at the forward end of the growth spectrum because of their size and their fandom. But when you look at someone like the NHL, they tend to be at the forward side of the innovation spectrum. And that's really interesting. And to speak to, and from an investor standpoint, sticking with the NHL for a second, the NHL actually, and these are we come out with fandom-based reports using all of our proprietary data called the Playfly fan score. We showed the NHL actually has the highest level of CEOs and C-level fans, which is really interesting when you're thinking about advertising and marketing, and especially investors, as to your question. But ultimately, all of that comes back down to, okay, how do you create more cash flow? Because that's what the PE investors are going to look for. They're going to look for cash flow. They're going to look for growth. If you're not providing that, you're not going to provide the return, because the valuations are high enough at the moment that you've got to actually show financial success, not just excitement and scarcity.
You just brought up a good point. Which sport, I guess, one hand has got to wash the other. You need the NHL. The NHL needs you. Now, as you progress, because the NFL, they're just obnoxiously like king. But it does come back to the question. It's like we're in an era now where one hand washes the other.
That's right. So ultimately, all boats are rising. And if you think about it from a perspective, and not only a perspective of the leagues and the teams, but you're seeing multi-team ownership across the leagues, and that's only going to continue to expand. So that combination is not only just because those owners want to be bigger owners. That's not the reason. It's because it provides business opportunities, economies of scale, opportunities to use services like the Playfly sports services across all of your teams, not just one of your teams. It allows your head of HR to be used across all of your teams. It's business operations. That's the biggest change that we're seeing, not only when you look at all the new money coming into franchise ownership, but now the PE money coming into franchise ownership, NFL being that last frontier. You're going to see more and more business optimization. And that's going to be an interesting wave. I think that's going to continue for the next 10 plus 15 years, and that's going to be investable. Whoever's working on those elements for business optimization is going to be a really interesting investable category in addition to the teams themselves.
Mike, I'd like to tap into your experience, at Hulu, you're a founder there, all the stuff you did with, regional sports networks, a model that is, arguably broken right now. What does the future of content consumption look like?
That's a great one. I love this one because we tend to talk to, in most of the conversations, about some of the struggles with debt or some of the struggles with bankruptcy that we're hearing in this space, in the regional sports network space. But the actual most interesting thing, I think, is if you think about it from the future perspective, what's actually the consumer experiencing now? What does it look like? And it breaks down into 7 different local media categories. Because if you think about it, local media is really the driving force of most impressions in the ecosystem. Most people are watching their local team. That's the experience in the U.S. That's the experience really in sports globally, is local fans. Local fandom drives it. So when you think about what's happening now, when you break down the RSN ecosystem, like you mentioned, there's still plenty of very successful RSNs and really amazing businesses like Nesson in Boston and others. But now you have 7 different models. So let's move the existing RSN. That leaves 6. The next is team-owned networks. The teams are buying their networks back. They want to have control. They want to be in the operating seat. Great example, Mighty Metal Sports in D.C. Third strategy is direct-to-consumer. The newest example that has just came out is the Dallas Stars just decided no TV, just direct-to-consumer only. Major revolution in what we're looking at from a local media perspective. Number 3. Number 4, which is actually the fastest growing and the biggest, is broadcast stations. So taking it out of the cable model and going back to the rabbit ears, right? Going back to the largest reach from a TV perspective and putting it back on the station like it's 1995.
I just want to jump in here. We did a piece just the other day. We were talking about Nike and Jim Donahoe, and we were talking about some of the moves he made. He's next being, obviously cost-cutting type of guy. And one of the things that worked early on was, going in-house, like the Utah Jazz, for example, controlling everything that is to do about how you reach your consumer. But when you do that, if you run into some trouble later on down the road, you don't have other avenues. You have no other distribution mechanism to. So
right.
Talk to us about that. Is that happening in your neck of the woods? Is that happening in the world of sports?
Yeah, so definitely. So what you're seeing in all this fragmentation, right? If you went through the rest of them, you'd see differing models for the fan, for the businesses. What ends up happening, and I call this the grand rebundling, what you're going to see is it breaks down.
Love it.
It breaks down right into all these fragments, and then everybody looks at each other and says, wasn't the bigger package better for everybody?
Right.
Wait, it was better for the consumer. They get everything.
And then let's go back there, and you're like, I can't do it so quickly.
And you ask some key learnings from the Hulu experience and the founding of that business, right? The grand rebundling, right? You're seeing it now. You're seeing TV. Hulu has a TV service that looks like cable, right? It's the grand rebundling. Everything's coming back because that's the most efficient way to drive the most value in sports media, period. So the breakdown is always going to happen. And then the rebundle is always going to happen. It's just how long in between those two things.
The secret's out on the WNBA, by the way. That eventually, I know you guys are going to have to. Let me put it this way. There's a lot of money to be made in the WNBA.
Oh, yeah. And fandom, again, as I said, is the currency. Fandom is increasing. The largest growth categories of fandom is in women's sports right now. Now, they're still small, but they're the highest growth percentages. So you're 100% right that if you follow the currency of fandom, as I mentioned, Playfly Sports uses fandom as a service. Right. The currency of fandom, women's sports, is a place to invest at the moment.
Interesting. So, I'll take it to the next level. The wild, wild west where, there's tons of fans, but they can't figure anything out is the world of college sports. You do a lot with the NCAA. NIL is real. And what's going on across the whole of, you've got, Nick Saban, he left his role as coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide because he's like, everybody just wants money now. It's all about the money. It's not about any fandom, any loyalty to your fan base. Talk to us a little bit about the challenges that lie ahead for the NCAA and college sports.
Yeah, it's the greatest turnover of athletic directors in the history of college sports. It's gotten so much more complicated and obviously an impetus for our business to be a service provider at Playfly Sports. But you're right, it's a money game now. And the interesting thing is we talked about the dominance of the NFL earlier. The largest attended sports category in the U.S. is college football. It is not the NFL.
And it's local.
It is right.
That's right.
It is not the NFL. So the NFL dominates TV still, college second, by the way, ahead of MLB, NBA. But it's the largest attended event category in the country. So when you think about that, it is not fully harvested for its value. It has not created a national model that is yet as big as the NFL has. And a lot of jockeying between conferences, a lot of elements are still to evolve. We're probably, I would say, 40% done the evolution of college sports. And wow, look at the last 5 years.
Our thanks to Michael Schreiber for joining us. He is the founder and CEO of Playfly. And thank you most of all for joining us on the Bloomberg Business of Sports. We're here each and every week at the same time. For my colleagues, Damian Sassower and Vanessa Perdomo, I'm Michael Barr. Tune in next week for the latest on the stories moving big old money in the world of sports. You're listening to the Bloomberg Business of Sports from Bloomberg Radio around the world.